Alright folks, this is Mr. O'Brien, and in this video we're going to read a few last words from Malcolm X's autobiography. We will watch one last video about Dr. King. It's only 5 or 6 or so minutes long. And then we will go into the final assessment, where we will be reading a bunch of final kind of like head note paragraphs and go into the requirements of the essay itself. Alright, so let's get to it. All right, so this is specifically from pages 385 and 388 to 389 in Malcolm X's autobiography. So just some last words. This is right from Malcolm X. So every morning when I wake up now, this is right before he died, I regard it as having another borrowed day. In any city, wherever I go, making speeches, holding meetings of my organization, or attending to other business, black men are watching every move I make, awaiting their chance to kill me. I have said publicly many times that I know that they have their orders. Anyone who chooses not to believe what I am saying doesn't know the Muslims in the Nation of Islam. Liv?
Anyway, now, each day I live as I'm already dead. And I'll tell you what I would like for you to do. When I am dead, I say it that way because from the things I know, I do not expect to live long enough to read this book in its finished form. I want you to just watch and see if I'm not right in what I say. That the white man in his press is going to identify me with hate.
Some pretty prescient words. He will make use of me dead, as he has made use of me alive, as a convenient symbol of hatred, and that will help him to escape facing the truth, that all I have been doing is holding up a mirror to reflect, to show the history of unspeakable crimes that his race has committed against my race.
And since I have been some kind of leader of black people here in the Racist Society of America, I have been more reassured each time the white man resists me or attacks me on it, because each time made me more certain that I was on the right track in the American black man's interest. The racist white man's opposition automatically made me know that I did offer the black man something worthwhile.
Yes, I have cherished my demagogue role. I know that societies often have killed the people who have helped to change those societies. And if I can die having brought any light, having exposed any meaningful truth that will help to destroy the racist cancer that is malignant in the body of America, then all of the credit is due to Allah, only the mistakes have been mine. So some pretty good last words from Malcolm X. All right, let's watch a final video about King. This is 6.5 minutes long, and it begins with footage of him showing up in Birmingham, eventually the March on Washington, and the last third of this video is a speech or an excerpt from a speech he gave called "I've Been to the Mountaintop" that he gave a mere hours before he was assassinated. So the words are pretty eerie.
King, can you tell us why you're here?
Well, we've come here. I have several of my staff members here at the invitation of Dr. Shuttlesworth and the Alabama Christian Movement to assess the situation and determine whether demonstrations are necessary, that is, whether they should be resumed. Consequently, I have the feeling that if we can get a breakthrough in Birmingham and really break down the walls of segregation, it will demonstrate to the whole South, at least the hardcore South, that it can no longer resist.
Recognize the song?
I will not rest
Little Miss Sunshine.
until we are able to make this kind of witness in this city, so that the power structure downtown will have to say, we can't stop this movement, and the only way to deal with it is to give these people what we owe them and what their God-given rights and their constitutional rights demand.
Gonna put it to the test. You wanted it to be blessed, and in your heart, you know it to be true.
This is Birmingham, 63.
You know what you gotta do.
Letters from a Birmingham jail.
Depend
Children's Crusade.
Responsible efforts on the part of both white and Negro leaders over the last 72 hours. The business community of Birmingham has responded in a constructive and commendable fashion and pledged that substantial steps would begin to meet the justifiable needs of the Negro community.
Dr. King, how big a victory is this for the American Negro?
Well, I think this is a very significant victory, not only for the American Negro, but for the country. One day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. We let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city. We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter.
These are his last words.
With me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the power of the Lord.
So also some pretty prescient words the night before he was assassinated. All right, so let's get to the final assessment. Did you say so long? All right, so I'll begin. All right, so how can these great leaders of the modern African-American freedom struggle and their relation to each other be most accurately understood? So keep that question in mind when you're writing your essay. When the two were first well known to each other in the early 60s, they were viewed by virtually everyone, by supporters and detractors, by the vast majority of whites, by most blacks, and by themselves as ideological nemesis and antagonists on all important questions involving race in America. This view of King and Malcolm as exact opposites continues to have many adherents today, certainly in the white-dominated mainstream opinion, considerably less so among African Americans.
There are reasons, some good, for the predominant dualistic image of King and Malcolm. First, through most of their careers, especially early on, King and Malcolm had very substantial disagreements. A partial list of their areas of major dispute includes the goals of interracial integration versus black separatism, using only nonviolent means of struggle versus seeking freedom by any means necessary, and commitments to Christianity versus Islam. In these and other key areas, large gaps separated their positions, especially early on, but their political ideologies began to grow closer in their later years.
A second reason for their portrayal as opposites, chiefly then and now, created and perpetuated by the white-controlled media, resides in widespread white phobias about blacks' feelings towards whites. Part of slavery's psychological inheritance in America is whites, often repressed, guilty knowledge that their kind has done abominable things to African Americans on their way to becoming the wealthiest and most powerful nation the planet has ever witnessed. Seeing that word there. This knowledge makes many whites consciously deny this historical connection between past and present, but are still fearful that blacks resent them and wish to take revenge on them. Alternately, whites yearn to believe that, notwithstanding past and present oppression, blacks forgive and accept them. Viewed through the lens of white racial guilt, King and Malcolm appear as symbols of these two so-called opposite black responses toward whites. Malcolm in the eyes of whites representing an avenging angel spewing hatred, and King a saintly figure who would lovingly correct and forgive whites. So it's more comfortable for white folk to remember them this way.
In background and temperament, the two men were quite dissimilar.
Sociologically.
Yeah, I can't pronounce that. King and Malcolm were quite dissimilar, other than both being black men in white supremacist America. King was born comfortably middle class and received exceptional educational opportunities, whereas Malcolm came from a poor broken home. Ben lived as a semi-literate criminal and prisoner before commencing his life's reformation. King was a kind of respectable and privileged
Bourgeois.
Oh, right, I'm not going to pronounce that.
Come on.
Negro, for whom Malcolm had contempt. Martin and his wife Coretta regarded
the NOI, Nation of Islam.
Teachings spouted by the younger Malcolm as
bizarre. Another reason for the dualistic vision of these men's relationship still circulates is that too little focus tends to be given to each leader's most advanced, latest thinking, meaning when they were older. I said earlier in the packet that they might as well have died in 63 and 65. We don't remember anything they said after that, which this packet seeks to rectify. Too many commentators dwell almost exclusively on the men's early careers in the 50s and 60s, early 60s, when they functioned mainly as foils to each other. After Malcolm's acceptance of true Islam and his departure from the Nation of Islam, he began to favor blacks pursuing traditional civil rights goals of desegregation and voting rights, and he no longer automatically defined whites as unchangeably evil. In his own last years, circa 66 through 68, King, now increasingly active in northern cities and expanding his activities towards economic justice, nearly as dramatically revised his own views on such things as the nature and tenacity of white racism, which was far deeper and harder to remove than he had earlier imagined, and on the extent of the many systematic changes that needed to be made in U.S. society to eradicate racism and remedy its damage. So again, they began to become more like each other. As King widened, alas, unfortunately, as far as the collective memory of King goes, he might as well have died in 63 too.
As King widened his view of the structural evils Starting America society by stressing the evils of poverty and imperialism, and went beyond the civil rights and identifying their solution. He moved rapidly toward the views and rhetoric more associated with Malcolm than his younger son.
Like words and phrases.
Additionally, King and Malcolm themselves understood the good cop, bad cop aspect of their public persona that existed, especially among white folks. They grasped the value to civil rights forces of having the scary nationalists around the point.
2 point.
2 point. To as the alternative, it would have refused to deal forthrightly with more reasonable, responsible Negro leaders. King often made references to the nationalists with the implied threat that blacks might turn to such philosophies if the nonviolent movement's demands for change were
not met.
Malcolm, in the true rhetorical form, put it most bluntly. He claimed he had made the whole civil rights movement become more militant and more acceptable to the white power structure. The white man would rather have them than us.
To be sure, Malcolm, even in his later years, remained adamant about black people's right to self-defense and to wage their freedom struggle by any means necessary. Even if he did hedge slightly in his new moderate image by suggesting that violent self-defense might prove unnecessary, Malcolm never wavered in asserting the simple intelligence in any event of being seen as ready and willing to use it, self-defense. For his part, King likewise never fully retreated from his unconditional moral and tactical commitment to nonviolence, as you heard in his most recent speeches, or latest speeches in the packet.
It is difficult to see this
impasse
between King and Malcolm on violence's role in the liberation movement could ever have been bridged. At the time of his death, Malcolm's refusal to object the possibility of physical self-defense or retaliation during
demonstrations.
Demonstrations still kept King from permitting Malcolm to participate in any event in which King took part. Of course, it is possible that one or both of them might yet have gone to revise significantly their positions on that issue.
It should be even if
no such compromise ever occurred, they could conceivably have found a way to disagree on that and still explore areas for cooperation, particularly in inner-city settings. It must be remembered that each side was taking steps toward opening a dialogue between the leaders to explore such possibilities. It looked like Malcolm's overtures to King, which started with that brief handshake in the Capitol, were finally about to pay off. But then 2 days before they were scheduled finally to meet up again, Malcolm was tragically cut down in a hail of bullets, leaving everyone afterward with only a tantalizing what ifs and irresolvable conjecture about the future course of these great leaders' relations.
So the influence of King and Malcolm did not end with their lives, for they achieved mythic status, and their images carry enormous symbolic weight. Although white Americans are almost universal in their reverence for King, that is significantly less true about Malcolm. Indeed, when King's birthday became a national holiday in 1983, he joined George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Abe Lincoln as the only Americans so honored. Despite some conservatives who insist that King was a communist stooge or agent or a moral reprobate undeserving of public esteem, King's stature as a heroic icon is nearly as universal among whites and blacks. Although among African Americans, Malcolm is as revered as King, Malcolm's iconic stature among whites is far less universal, as many whites still see Malcolm as a ranting, crazed white hater. Indeed, our memory of the mythic leaders gets flattened and drained of complexity, oversimplistic. Their body of work is often simplified and distorted. Precisely because King and Malcolm continue to influence people potently, however, and because of the conflicting purposes for which they are used by modern public figures, it is vital for educated people, like you, to know some of the real range and depth of their thought and leadership. Otherwise, how can one help but be misled and manipulated by simplistic, Wolf Blitzerish, or outright false images of them put out by interested parties with an agenda? No one-dimensional frozen snapshots of them viewed outside the totality of their evolving lives and ideas will do. How tragic it would be if most people got beyond crude caricatures. Malcolm as a raving racial fanatic and King as a mild, harmless saint. If King and Malcolm's messages and lives still hold relevance for a society not completely delivered from personal and structural racism and a world still with too many people who are unfree and poor, if we can learn anything worthwhile from them in a world of rising ethnic and racial conflict and hatred, then we owe it to ourselves and our posterity, our legacy, our memory, to look at these leaders and their ideas in a manner approaching their true depth and complexity.
Now that you hopefully have a very intelligent understanding of the key ideas of the two leaders/strategies, you are ready as reporters to complete your culminating task of writing a persuasive column for my journal/magazine.
All right, you can go now.
Bye!
All right, so here are the details. All right, so the article should be long, and it should include the following points. It should have A, an introduction, including gobs of specific details about conditions facing Black Americans then and now. All right, so use what you've learned about the past throughout US 1 and 2, and what you learn about the present through redlining, the effects of it, and watching, say, excerpts of 13th. Okay, to write your introduction, conditions facing Black Americans then and now. Okay, second section, a section on the evolving argument of Malcolm X's vision. Third section, a section explicating, meaning explaining in very thorough detail, the evolving argument of Martin Luther King's vision. D, a section in which you will discuss the extent to which our memories of King versus Malcolm may differ from the reality. So you have a choice here. All right, in sections B and C, the section on Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, you can include lots of information about their latter beliefs, or you can save that for section D, because that kind of lends itself to that topic. Talking about their later beliefs lends itself to talking about how we don't remember them correctly or completely. Okay? Now, the last section, and this is the one that's kind of original, a concluding section in which you discuss why you think we need to understand this. Why is it worthwhile to spend so much time going over the two of these? Why did I spend 10 years or more making it into this large packet? In other words, how does knowing this stuff help us today, in your view? So in this section, you are to move outside our classwork and conduct research. You are to take, and in doing this, you are to take a deep dive into the provided website. So if you look on the class website, let me show it to you right now. Okay, on the left-hand side, sidebar on the left-hand side, you see civil rights - MLK, Malcolm X, and Black Lives Matter. There are gobs and gobs of resources that are mostly categorized into different sections. Okay, I have a section on the effects of redlining. Some sources I highly recommend over others, meaning I really want you to read them. All right, I have a miscellaneous section, historical section. I have ones that specifically may help you with sections 1 and 4, past and current context. And I have up here a number of mandatory, mandatory sources. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sources, 1 or 2 of which may become annotation assignments. All right, and I also have a section on King's evolution in thought. All right, and of course you can look at do your own research, or find your own sources is what I'm saying. But you are to take a deep dive, okay, and explain why to you you think this is important. Why do we need to understand what the two of these folks thought? How it would help us today? Now, other requirements. gobs of research for your conclusion. All right. Needs to be typed. Clever title. Very often, scholars choose the title after the essay is completed. But it should be a clever title. Don't just name it King and X. Make it clever. Right? I say minimum 2,000 words, considering that a double-spaced page is about 200 to 250 words. The minimum is 8 pages, but that should not be the minimum. I mean, should not be, again, quantity should not be an issue. All right. As I always say, think of it as a number of smaller papers. Think of it in sections. Give yourself goals. By this date, I'll write this section. By this date, I'll write the second section, so on and so forth. Okay? Have a byline. I mean, this is an essay in a magazine. I mean, look up magazines online, all right, and see, how long these essays can be. If it's a featured article in a magazine, and I give some examples of magazines in the beginning of the packet. Okay, it's got to have at least 3 images with captions, and remember, you can't use the one time they met each other. All right. And as far as citation goes, it's got to be Chicago style, and it's got to have footnotes and endnotes. That's all I'm going to look for, footnotes and endnotes. Remember, I'm not going to care about every single little rule of Chicago style. I care that you're consistent. Okay? Now, the second open bullet here, the one that begins right here. All right, you can cite this. You can cite. What do I have here? You can cite the sources, the website, when that is all. Okay, so remember, for every single speech and primary source in the packet, I give you the source where I got it. So that's how I would like you to cite it. All right, whether if it's from Malcolm's autobiography, cite the book. If it's a website link that I provided as the source, all right, please follow the link and cite the website. All right. The idea is for you to get used to, citing your work. All right. Now, this second to last bullet here, if you use any information from the text boxes, I'd say about 60% of it are my words, about maybe 35–40% of it is information I took from a book by, if you look over here, David Howard Pitney. And he wrote a book called Martin Luther King, Jr., Malcolm X, and the Civil Rights Struggle of the 1950s and 60s. All right, just Google the book online. The cover of the book is that photograph of Malcolm and King meeting each other and shaking hands. All right, it's pretty easy to find. Just look it up on Amazon to find all the information. Okay, don't worry about page numbers. Just cite the book. All right. If you use any of these selections of Malcolm X's autobiography, which you should, all right, there's 2 or 3 sections in the packet where I took from his autobiography. All right, I gave you the page numbers to use, and the pagination, the page numbers, refers to the 1999 Ballantine Books edition. That's the name of the publisher. And let me just check if this website still works. This should be a website to the book. Yep, right there. So for citation purposes, you can look at this information to fill in the Chicago Method citations right there. That's what the book looks like. All right. Anything else? That's it. Those are the requirements.